Things, Ferns, and Wonder. I'm Kelly Johnson, your Creative Nature Connection Guide. And in this time when we're at home and have a little extra time, I thought I would start a nature story series because I was going to bed last night and I thought, I wish someone would read me a story. And so maybe some of you are also having that thought. And I will be reading what would be categorized technically as children's stories, but I think they're very much more than that. And they're all some of my own favorite stories that I've read with children, read with myself when I was a child, and really just honestly enjoy now. So we're going to kick it off with one of my favorite stories from when I was a kid and also from when I was teaching. And each of the stories that we read, I'll also give a nature journaling prompt at the end, as well as sometimes a fun activity that you can do in conjunction with the story. And again, this is not just for children. This is for all humans. We can all use a little creative nature connection these days to lift our spirits and help us feel connected, because we're always connected to nature. So let's begin. Today we're going to start with the story The Boy Who Didn't Believe in Spring, because it's spring, by Lucille Clifton and illustrated by Brinton Turkle. Once upon a time, there was a little boy named King Shabazz who didn't believe in spring. "No such thing," he would whisper every time the teacher talked about spring in school. "Where's it at?" he would holler every time his mama talked about spring at home. He used to sit with his friend Tony Polito on the bottom step when the days started getting longer and warmer and talk about it. "Everybody's talking about spring," he would say to Tony. "Big deal," Tony would say back. "No such thing," he would say to Tony. "Right," Tony would say back. One day, after the teacher had been talking about birds that were blue, and his mama had started talking about crops coming up, King Shabazz decided he had had just enough. He put his jacket on and his shades, and he went by for Tony Polito. "Look here, man," King said when they got out to the bottom step. "I'm gonna get me some of this spring." "What you mean, man?" Tony asked him. "Everybody talking about spring coming, and spring just around the corner. I'm gonna go around there and see what do I see." Tony Polito watched King Shabazz get up and push his shades tight up on his nose. "You coming with me, man?" he said while he was pushing. Tony Polito thought about it for a minute. Then he got up, turned his cap around backwards. "Right," said Tony Polito. King Shabazz and Tony Polito had been around the corner before, but only as far as the street light alone. They passed the school and the playground. "Ain't no spring in there," said King Shabazz with a laugh. "Sure ain't," agreed Tony Polito. They passed Weissman's. They stopped for a minute by the side door at Weissman's and smelled the buns. "Sure do smell good," whispered Tony. "But it ain't spring," King was quick to answer. They passed the apartments and walked fast in case they met Junior Williams. He had said in school that he was going to beat them both up. Then they were at the street light. Tony stopped and made believe his sneaker was untied to see what King was going to do. King stopped and blew on his shades to clean them to see what Tony was going to do. They stood there for 2 light turns, and then King Shabazz grinned at Tony Polito. He grinned back, and the 2 boys ran across the street. "Well, if we find it, it ought to be now," said King, and Tony didn't say anything. He just stood looking around. "Well, come on, man," King whispered, and they started down the street. They're not supposed to cross that corner, are they? They passed the Church of the Solid Rock with high windows all decorated and pretty. They passed a restaurant with little round tables near the window. They came to a takeout shop and stood by the door a minute to smell the barbecue. "Sure would like to have some of that," whispered King. "Me too," whispered Tony with his eyes closed. They walked slower down the street. Just after they passed some apartments, King Shabazz and Tony Polito came to a vacant lot. It was small and had high walls from apartments on 3 sides of it, 3 walls around it, and right in the middle, a car. It was beautiful. The wheels were gone and so were the doors, but it was dark red and sitting high on a dirt mound in the middle of the lot. Oh, man, whispered King. Oh, man, whispered Tony. Then they heard the noise. It was a little long sound like smooth things rubbing against rough, and it was coming from the car. It happened again. King looked at Tony and grabbed his hand. "Let's see what it is, man," he whispered. He thought Tony would say no, let's go home. Tony looked at King and held his hand tightly. "Right," he said very slowly. The boys stood there a minute, then began tiptoeing over towards the car. They walked very slowly across the lot, and when they were halfway to the car, Tony tripped and almost fell. He looked down and saw a patch of little yellow pointy flowers growing in the middle of short spiky green leaves. "Man, I think you tripped on these crops," King laughed. "They're coming up," Tony shouted. "Man, the crops are coming up." And just as Tony was making all that noise, they heard another noise, like a lot of things waving in the air, and they looked over at the car, and 3 birds flew out of one of the door holes and up to the wall of the apartment. King and Tony ran over to the car to see where the birds had been. They had to climb up a little to get to the door and look in. They stood there looking a long time without saying anything. There on the front seat, down in a whole lot of cottony stuff, was a nest. There in the nest were 4 light blue eggs. Blue! King took off his shades. "Man, it's spring," he said, almost to himself. "Anthony Polito!" King and Tony jumped down off the mound. Somebody was shouting for Tony as loud as he could. "Anthony Polito!" The boys turned and started walking out of the vacant lot. Tony's brother Sam was standing at the edge of the lot looking mad. "Mom's gonna kill you after I get finished with you, Squirt," he hollered. King Shabazz looked at Tony Polito and took his hand. "Spring is here," he whispered to Tony. "Right," whispered Tony Polito back. The end. So King and Tony didn't think that they could find spring, but they found in the most unexpected place, didn't they? They found flowers, and then they found the bluebird eggs that their teacher was talking about in school. They thought the flowers were crops, but they're just little kids. That's okay. Sorry about that. Speaking of spring, spring wind blew the camera over. But I just want to get you thinking a little bit, even you grown-ups. King Shabazz probably didn't believe in spring because he lived in the city. He lived in a very urban part of the city where there wasn't many plants, and he wasn't seeing many trees or flowers or even birds until they went around the corner. His mom said spring's just around the corner. Did she literally mean it was around the corner of his block? No, she meant in time just around the corner. But King and Tony figured that out as well. But think about, and you can use this as a prompt in your nature journals, what are some signs of spring where you live? So you can take a few minutes and draw some signs of spring that you've seen where you live. And depending on where you live, it might be still a little chilly, or it could be very, very warm and have lots of signs of spring. So a little bit about the author. Lucille Clifton is a famous poet and writer of children's books. When she was just 16 years old, she became the first member of her family to earn a scholarship and attend college. She knew while attending college that what she wanted most was to be a writer. However, it took her many years to reach her goal. Lucille Clifton first finished college, married, and had 6 children. When she did publish her first book, a book of poems called Good Times, the New York Times named it one of the 10 best books of the year. And since then, she's won many awards and has become one of the most famous poets and children's authors. And the illustrator, Brinton Turkle, is a famous illustrator of children's books as well as an author. He first studied drama for a while in college, then he decided to focus more on drawing and went to school for fine arts. He's written many famous children's books in the hopes that they will teach children kindness, honesty, and a love for life. And I think that's probably a lesson that we can all be reminded of, especially now. And I hope you're a little bit inspired by King Shabazz and Tony Polito and Lucille Clifton and Brinton Turkle to really take some moments each day to enjoy the spring and notice, even if it's just looking out your window at the clouds rolling by. You can see back here, there's some pretty spectacular clouds rolling by. And many of us aren't in a time or place right now where we can grow gardens in our community gardens, or maybe we're in an apartment. So if you want to get some spring crops coming up, all you need is a little bit of celery. This was just celery from the grocery store, cut off at the base. We've eaten this part of it. And a little cup. This is literally a yogurt cup. A little bit of water in the bottom, and place the celery in. Give it a couple of days, and just like in a cooking show, you can when it starts to get leaves, your celery will regrow. When it starts to get leaves, then you can place it in a little bit of soil, or not. You don't have to. If you don't have access to soil right now, don't even think about that. Just leave it in water and let your celery crops grow. And you can also draw those in your nature journal. And if you do decide to nature journal or grow the celery project, I would love to see it. So if you'll post it on Instagram and tag me and hashtag Wings, Worms, and Wonder, and I will repost it here in the stories and on the feed. There's also lots more creative nature connection activities on my blog, wingswormsandwonder.com. A link through the profile if you want, and I've got also free nature drawing tutorials there and on my YouTube channel. So I hope y'all have a wonderful spring day, and I'll see you back here for the next story. Bye.